All right. Algebra 2, lecture 419 and 420, OSA 2822. Student will simplify complex fractions. This is a review. I just want to remind you that if we're going to simplify complex fractions, which is one fraction divided by another fraction, we just invert and multiply, okay? And cancel if possible. Remember that we can only cancel common factors. Factors are things that are multiplied together, not added or subtracted. So here we go. Take a look at them. Shouldn't take too long to run through this. Simplify. I've got this fraction divided by this fraction. So I'm going to leave the top one alone. And multiply it by the reciprocal of the bottom. I'm going to invert this. Invert and multiply. Now what we got to keep in mind here is that there are some things we can cancel. The numerator and the denominator of any fraction have implied parentheses around them. So in a situation like this where I have a binomial here and a binomial here, this is when I invert and multiply, this binomial times 2 makes these two factors, and this monomial number times this makes these two factors. So this is factor, 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 factor. I can cancel common factors. So what I'm going to do is call that a fancy form of 1, and I can see that there will be a 2 that will cancel here. If I divide this by 2, it turns into the number 1, and I've got to divide that by 2 also. I'm canceling a 2, and that will turn into an 8. And then I just write what's left. Anytime you cancel something, it turns into a 1, if the whole thing cancels. So I cancel this, cancel that, that turned into a 1, that turned into a 1. So this is 1 times 1 in the top, which is 1. And in the bottom, I divided this by 2, but the whole thing didn't cancel, of course, it was left with an 8. So this is 8 times this 1, which is 8. So this whole thing simplifies to 1/8, if I haven't made a mistake. And I'm going to take a look at my key if I can find it and see if the key agrees with me. 1/8, yay! I like to have the key handy because I make mistakes. And if I make them, I like to try to find them. But invert and multiply, cancel common factors. You cannot cancel across a plus or minus sign. This isn't x canceling x and 4 canceling 4. This is this entire quantity canceling this entire quantity. This times this makes them factors. This times this makes those factors, and you can only cancel common factors. Now let's take a look at another one here. I have 1/3 divided by x over 2. So I'm going to think of that as 1/3 times 2 over x. If I look at that, there are no common factors that I can cancel, so I'm just going to perform my multiplication. 1 times 2 is 2. 3 times x is 3x. And if they ask you to state the restrictions on the variable, we would say, well, x cannot equal 0, because 3 times 0 would be 0, and we can't have a 0 in the denominator of a fraction. That makes it undefined. So there's our answer, and x cannot equal 0. They didn't ask us for that, but for the restriction, but if they did, that's what we would say. And 2 over 3x, yay! I'm on a roll. Okay, here we have x plus 5 over 9 divided by 9 over x plus 5. So let's invert and multiply. Leave this one alone. Remember, there are implied parentheses there. And I'm going to invert and multiply this one. Whoops, I almost called that an x. So I rewrote this one just the way it is, and I inverted and multiplied. So I no longer have this written as a quotient. This divided by this is now this times the inverse of this inverted right here. I'm going to perform the multiplication. There's nothing that will cancel. So I'm going to multiply these two. There are two ways we could write this answer. I'll do both ways. First of all, we could call it u squared plus 5u plus another 5u, I'm foiling, plus 25 over 9 times 9, which is 81. We could combine like terms. U squared plus 10u. I'm going to scooch this up a little bit so you guys can see. 5u plus 5u, that's 10u, combining like terms. Plus 25 over, and we multiplied these two together and got 81. And that's one way of representing the answer. I'm not sure how the answer key represents it, but it could represent it like this. Scooch this over just a little bit. We'll lose that 81 there. And you could just say, whoop, that's not what I wanted to happen. U plus 5 times U plus 5, you could just call that U plus 5. Anything multiplied by itself is that thing squared. So U plus 5 times U plus 5, we could call that U plus 5 quantity squared over 81. This is how I personally would do it, because my instructors always told me, always leave everything in factored form. But in the event that they went ahead and multiplied it using FOIL, you would get this. And now I'm going to see which one the answer key goes with. U squared plus 10u plus 25 over 81. Okay, so they went this route. They wanted me to FOIL this, combine my like terms, and write that as a quadratic trinomial over 81. I personally would have just called it this. But it's not how the key does it, so I'm glad I showed you both ways. Here's the last one in the lecture, I believe. I think there are only 4. We're going to divide this fraction by this fraction, so I'm going to invert and multiply this one, leave this one alone. Not going to flip it over, times 25 over u. Now notice there's no addition or subtraction going on here. Like here we had u plus 5, so forth and so on. There's just this times this in the top, and this times this in the bottom. So these are factors. That means things that are multiplied together. And these are factors. And you can cancel common factors. If you have common factors in the top and bottom of a fraction, you can just cancel them. They become a fancy 1. For instance, u divided by u is 1. So these both turn into 1s when I cancel them. This will turn into a 5 because I'm going to divide both of these by 5. 25 divided by 5 is 5. 5 divided by 5 is another 1. You can write the 1 there if you want. That's what they turn into. That turns into a 1 as well. And once we've canceled, we go ahead and multiply what's left, and that's our reduced form of our answer. So we got 3 times 1 times 1 times 5, so that's 15 if I do my arithmetic correctly. And we got 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. So if I haven't messed up, this just turns into 15. Let's see if I messed up. Let's double check it. I left that alone. I flipped this over, canceled the u's, and canceled 25 and 5. That will move 3 times 5 over 1. Yeah, 15. So yeah, let's see what the key says. 15, yay! Alright, so that's a little walk down memory lane. I just wanted to review this again for you. Review, invert, and multiply. That's how you divide by fractions. And so you leave the top one alone, flip the bottom one over, that's invert. Cancel common factors. Those are things that are multiplied together. You cannot cancel across the plus or minus signs. And then rewrite your expression. Flip it over. If nothing cancels, just go ahead and multiply. Here we flipped it over, wound up with a binomial times a binomial. The key had us multiply these together using FOIL and combining like terms. Another way of doing it was to just say this times this is u plus 5 quantity squared. That would be acceptable, but you won't find that on the key today. And this one, of course, we flipped it over, canceled everything, and just wrote what was left. It turned out to be just 15. You can do this.